Hi, everybody. Good evening to everyone. It's a pleasure. It's a great pleasure to be here this night with our beloved Claire Venables, which is an amazing person. I'm sure it's gonna be worth staying up late for you guys that are in Europe and other places. So it's gonna be great talk today. I don't have much to do here. Just want to introduce her. And what I would say is just how we prepare for that future that's already there. So talk about 21st century skills when already a fifth or 20% of that 20th century skills are 20th century is already gone, not the skills, but the 20th century itself. We have to jump into that. And some thoughts here is how we get future proof your teaching. So quick question, how many of you teachers have made questions to your students which you already know the answers? I could see some hand raising. 1, 2, 3, 4, yes. Most of us, we always do questions that we know the answers. But what would be teaching about if we think of teaching based on experience? Let us discover, let us find out what's coming out as an answer. And that's the great difference if we aim for the future. Aiming for the future, meaning having to live in an unstable, nonlinear world, in a, let's say, unpredictable world, in an exponential world. So that's the world we have to face. That's the world we have to bring our new children up to be able to explore, to be able to discover, to be able to find out their own answers and not the answers we might have ready in the back of our books. And when we think of preparing students for that challenge, it's completely different. It changes our teaching mindset. It changes our perspective to control much more the process than the result itself. And I think you're gonna hear some amazing thoughts and stories and ideas from Claire Venables tonight, which I'm sure you're gonna think twice on next Monday when you enter your class, how you're gonna start your class and how you're gonna start teaching your students. I'm sure you're gonna be excited about what the future is there for us to explore. Let's explore the future. Claire, welcome. Sorry for my long introduction. I just want to have people thinking about that. And you're more than welcome, please.
Listen to you talk about education for hours. You know that's true. I really align with what Enrique believes when it comes to education and what we should be preparing our young learners for. We often have long talks about this, and that's why when he invited me to give this talk tonight, I was absolutely delighted. As most of you know, I'm very passionate about teaching young learners, but I'm also equally passionate about connecting with community. And that's why I'm so grateful to see so many of you here late at night on a Friday to come and listen to this particular topic that I'm so passionate about. For any of you who follow me on social media and know my work today, you might be surprised to hear, and Hiki, you might be surprised to hear this too, that I used to be a really traditional English teacher. In fact, you might have even heard me say something like, give me a blob of blue tack and a deck of flashcards and I can create you a course. And I wasn't exaggerating. You see, back then I was all about teaching the lexical list. And I admit that I followed a rather rigid lesson plan framework that really relied heavily on what's this? What's this? Listen and repeat. How times thankfully have changed. And like so many others, I have begun a journey of professional transformation after realizing that my role as a language teacher needed to be radically rewritten if I was to remain relevant. I think we can all agree that the unexpected closing of schools and the overnight shift to emergency remote teaching has put an enormous strain on educators and parents. But as we get closer and closer to the end of this health crisis, we can really begin to think about what we've learned from this experience, and how we can perhaps use it as an opportunity for making positive changes to the way that we teach. So tonight in this webinar, I'd like to do three things. I'd like to share some predictions about the kind of skills educators and students might need to thrive in the future. And I'd also like to introduce you to the FutureWe framework and how I've been using it to plan lessons for primary aged learners. And these lessons that really focus on developing real world contextual skills while also learning English. So, how does that sound? Before we begin, let me quickly say hello to all of the educators from the active English teaching community. I see you there in the chat. It's so great to have you with me, and I'd love to know who else is here. So please go ahead, if you haven't already, please introduce yourself to the other participants in the comments there in the chat. Let me know a little bit about you. Not just where you're joining us from, but tell us a bit about your current teaching context. Are you online? Are you hybrid? Are you back in the classroom? And here's the important one. Why are you interested in this topic? I'd love to know. And while you're doing that, I'd like to tell you what's prompted me to give this webinar. Like everyone else, I was completely caught off guard when the pandemic hit. At the time, my main role was working to support young learner teachers, and I was devastated to see how hard things got as teachers really struggled to adapt to emergency remote teaching. The community, though, it really pulled together, and in a fairly short time, I could see that some teachers had managed to reinvent their teaching practice successfully. Now, okay, it may seem strange to be talking about anyone thriving during an international health crisis, but let me tell you, I have met teachers who have achieved amazing things professionally in 2021, and it was these stories these are the stories that kept me hopeful, okay? For me, personally, it's been a bit of a mix. It's been triumphs, it's been failures. I feel privileged to be able to stay at home and stay healthy, but there have been lots of ups and downs. Does anyone else relate to what I'm saying? So I've asked myself, what do the people who are not just managing to keep it together like me, but these people who are doing better than ever? And I could name a few people here that I know from the community. What do these people have in common? And you know what I discovered? The people who did well in 2020 were not necessarily the ones who had expertise in online teaching. Most of them were as unprepared as the rest of us. But what did they have? They had resilience. They had emotional intelligence and creative problem solving. They had entrepreneurship. And most importantly, I think they were connected to this
Claire, you're
community.
breaking up, I think.
Am I back?
With me, is it you?
Yes.
You're back. I think you have to repeat the last one. Yes,
Oh.
just repeat last sentence.
Yes.
You are breaking up.
Well, I think most importantly, they were connected to this community. Help them grow and develop despite the crisis. Why don't you let me know what helped you and your students get through last year? Write to me in the chat. I'm going to take a guess and say that none of you had studied anything about emergency remote teaching before we found ourselves in this mess. What was it that got you through? What skills, what qualities, what mindsets help you out there? And let me have a quick look at what you say. Reflect a little bit. Let's have a look what people say. Connection with children on a personal level from Heidi, from I know Heidi from Instagram. She's got a wonderful Instagram account there that I love your work, Heidi. Adaptation, says Lizimara. Being able to adapt quickly was certainly one of these skills that we needed. Classroom community, social and emotional skills. Fantastic. connecting with families, says Gisele. So connection, community, resilience, this growth mindset that people are talking about, self-care, very, very interesting. A lot of these things that we needed, a lot of these things that help us get through being able to adapt, being able to problem solve, being creative. None of these concepts are new. These are these famous, almost infamous 21st century or soft skills that we've been talking about in ELT for years now. But perhaps this pandemic was a bit of a wake-up call for us all. What do you think? When we were hit with one of the biggest challenges educators have faced in my entire career, at least, this has been the biggest challenge. I ask myself, where was my creativity, growth mindset, and resilience? I'm going to be honest, I went into panic mode there for a while. We all did. And that made me wonder, have we been trying to teach skills to students that we ourselves lack? I don't have the answer. I can't answer that question for you, but I really do believe, and I'm certain you'll agree with me, that it really is time for a radical shift in the way that we do things. And I'm not talking about adding a lesson on empathy to your weekly planning. I'm talking about a concrete, large-scale change that will actually enable us and our learners to develop and show their competence in the skills that they're going to need to survive in this constantly changing environment that we now live. How many of you have heard of the Future Jobs Report? The latest version of this came out in 2020, and these are the top 5 skills that are predicted to be needed in 2025. 4 years away, folks. Analytical thinking and innovation is the number 1. Active learning and learning strategies, complex problem solving, critical thinking and analysis, creativity, originality, and initiative. If you haven't started developing these skills, there's never been a better time to do so. Let's think about this for a minute. We're in a situation where many children have returned or will return to school after being isolated for well over a year, possibly 2. The level of disruption to their daily routine, their social emotional development, their learning, we can't even begin to measure the loss. Think about the new challenges that teachers and students will face. We simply can't go back to what we were doing before. Too much has changed, too much has been lost, and children are far too demotivated to be able to recover their interest and their passion for your classes with lessons that rely on rote memorization. And this, folks, unfortunately, is an approach that's been far too common in language classrooms for far too long. And I'll tell you this, even during 2020, when we were all online, I have seen far too much of it. If you're a teacher who's been relying on these types of strategies, if you feel that a good lesson is one where your students learn a list of words or memorize grammar rules, I'm sorry to say this, but I feel that your time is also coming to an end. You're not providing learners with anything that a good app or website can't do for a fraction of the price. You can be replaced. I'm not being dramatic here. Did you know that they predict that 40 to 70% of today's jobs will be impacted by artificial intelligence? This here that you're seeing is not an unrealistic prediction of what the future holds, especially for the current generation of students in our classroom. Okay, maybe I am being a little bit dramatic with the robots. It's not going to look like that. But seriously, think about it. Think about what happened during the pandemic. When the pandemic came, with it came rapid advancements of digital tools and a huge number of learners and teachers using them. We've seen simultaneous translation devices, platforms that offer self-guided learning for language students. So is it that far-fetched to imagine a world where people are no longer willing to invest all that time and money on English classes with these traditional language teachers who can't evolve with the times? I know I sound like I'm being really harsh at the moment on my colleagues, But I mean, it's time to change. It's time to stop talking about change and time to actually start putting that into action. It isn't my intention to paint this sort of bleak picture of the future, quite the opposite. I don't think for a second that I can be replaced by a machine. And that's because I believe that educators have skills that artificial intelligence can't replace. It's just not that content, that rote memorization. About 3 years ago, I met Jonathan Nalder, and I discovered the FutureWe framework and the FutureWe community. I'm so excited about this, and I know I'm not alone. This international community has hundreds of specialists from different areas all contributing to build this framework that you see on the slide here. The idea that drives this project is really simple. For students and workers to be ready to thrive in the future, educators need a shift in mindset. We need to stop forcing students to spend years learning content. Years, it's literally years, right, that students spend in English classes. We need to stop teaching them this content that just prepare them for jobs that won't exist, that have no transferable skills. Instead, let's teach the skills that will allow people to be ready to invent new solutions, to create their own jobs, no matter what the future brings, no matter what crisis is just around the corner. Wouldn't that be nice? The FutureWe framework features these, what you can see here, there's 5 top-level domains: explore, relate, design, deliver, share. But this isn't just a list, right? You've got 20 future literacies and over 45 key best practice ideas. You'll see the full framework on their website. So it's not just a list, it's a holistic and it's a contextual journey. And that's what has me so excited. That's what sparked my imagination, perhaps. And I started playing around with this framework and seeing how I could start incorporating this into my language lessons. This might still seem a little abstract, so I'd like to share exactly how I've been using the FutureWe framework as a backbone to plan lessons for primary learners. And I think that you can do the same. I'm going to be explaining the 5 domains and what each one is all about. And then I'll give you practical examples of how I use these in lesson stages, just to make it a little bit more concrete. Okay, I think that a lesson like this, or this approach that I'm taking, I think you could create a whole course around this, or you could also be teaching with a course book and start incorporating these lessons, connecting these lessons into a unit that you're teaching at a typical language school or a bilingual school, for example. The concrete lesson I'm going to share with you today, it actually deals with languages for places in the city and traditional dates for celebrations. This is so typical in our language course book. So I wanted to show you how flexible this is. You don't need to be working in a special fancy bilingual school to make this happen. You can be working in a language school and start incorporating this into what you're doing. Let me give you a little bit of background about the lesson. The lesson comes from a bigger project that I did. And the project was called Sao Paulo Through My Eyes. The whole concept of this was that we often take the place that we live for granted. And getting children to explore the city that they live in with new eyes can be fascinating. And it can encourage a new appreciation for where they live. And my sort of key or driving question here was, what places and people make this city unique, challenging, or enjoyable for children? Are you all ready for this with me? You coming on this little journey? We're going to be defining community in this lesson and identifying how we can bring community together. Let's take a look at how I do this in practice. We start with explore. And in the FutureWe framework, this domain is all about play. It's all about being open to exploring and curiosity, which is, of course, some of the essential elements for developing our creative thinkers. So when planning a lesson, the explore stage can also be used as a way of building rapport. And why do I think this is so important? Because I really believe that in order for learners to approach problems creatively without fear of failure, participating actively, it's really essential that we cultivate a trusting and supportive classroom community. I feel that teachers often assume that this will happen naturally on its own, but it doesn't. It doesn't happen on its own. So that's why I include this explore stage to every one of my lessons. And it usually involves cooperative games and activities. I just want to ensure that every lesson starts off in a way that contributes to this sense of unity and collaboration in a very non-competitive, very playful way. Okay, so this is the explore stage. What does this look like? Let me give you an example lesson. If I was in a class with children in the room with me, I would use a ball of wool and I would throw it around the class, hanging on to the thread in my hand, and I'd throw it to, perhaps I would start by saying something that I like to do in my local area. For example, think of a real one. I like to go to the street market on Fridays and eat pastel and drink caldo de cana. And the first person to say, me too, I would then throw the ball of wool to them, holding on to the end. So we are now connected by a piece of yarn or a piece of wool. And then it would be that person's turn to say something that they love to do in their city. And then we continue this game like this until everyone eventually is connected. I think this is a beautiful way to start off a lesson by showing students in the group just how much we have in common with each other. So I think we could even do that one online if we wanted to. I bet we could use a chat box. Let's have a look at the next stage. It's, of course, relate. Children in the wild, not in captivity, but children out in the wild are naturally eager to learn. And if we can tap into their natural curiosity, it's a powerful way to motivate and engage them in the topic or problem. I rarely see that happening in course books, do you? Content is usually presented to students without making any connection to their real lives, their interests, or the problems and needs of their community. That's why it's so hard for some children to stay engaged and feel invested. The relate stage can be a real game changer for your teaching. This is also the stage, or the lesson stage, where I focus on providing input and scaffolding that the students are going to need in order to explore the topic on their own in the following stages. I haven't forgotten that this is a language lesson. We need to give them some Lego bricks to build with, and that all happens here in the relate stage. What does this look like in practice? Let's keep going with this lesson. We've played with the yarn, we've connected with each other by finding things that we have in common that we want to do in the city. Now, I will have, in a previous lesson, invited them to bring in photos, videos, news reports, events, whatever they like, which talk about the traditions or celebrations in the local community. And I will make sure that I bring in some as well, because we know what students are like. You know, there will be those kids who won't bring in anything. So make sure you bring in some of these examples as well, and look at these as a class. Just use the images. You can do this with even low-level language learners. Show them the pictures. Give them time to look at the pictures. Ask them questions. Have they participated in the event? What does their family do to celebrate the event? Provide language support here. You might like to use some sentence stems. We celebrate by ... with ... When bringing in photographs from, especially when it's to do with different cultures from different parts of the world, please be very careful to use images from different local cultural groups, not just one. And make sure you show a range of people from different backgrounds and different socioeconomic brackets. Talk about what everyone has in common. Develop this idea of traditions, customs, celebrations, because these really build a sense of identity, of community, and the city or the country that you live in, or even other countries. I think this is a really, really nice way of exploring what our guiding question was. that is idea number 2. Let's move on to the next stage of my lesson. So as you can see, we've got the playful moment where we connect with each other. We have language input helping them relate the topic to their real lives, and then comes design. This is the lesson stage where children take the lead and work collaboratively with their peers. And of course, they're beginning to design a creative solution to a problem or a challenge. This took me a while to wrap my head around, because it can't be pre-scripted. You can't come in and say, now you're going to design A, and you have to work with this person, and you have to do this, this, and this. You have to give them time and space to think, to discuss, to brainstorm, to make their own choices, to create and to plan. And the role of the teacher here is always to maybe model some language, ask really intelligent, useful questions, monitor. You can provide input and support, but only where and when needed. Taking a step back can be the biggest challenge for a teacher, especially when we're used to having such a central role, right, in the classroom activities. This for me was hard. Learning to take a step back and let the kids go for it. Will they use English 100% of the time? No. Is that going to prevent them from reaching my learning goals and my language learning goals for the lesson? Absolutely not. L1 can be used to support this L2 language learning without a doubt. And this is what happens at the design stage. Let me give you another real concrete example. We're still in the same lesson that I was describing before, but now students are going to be asked to design an event to bring together the people from their local community. They're going to design it. They're going to plan it. It could be whatever and include whatever they want. To help them plan, I think it's really useful by getting them to think about what takes place in the events that they already participate in. And we've got the photos and everything there to help prompt them and help remind them of that. They can use their favorite ideas from the new celebrations that you might have brought in as well. I love to bring in celebrations from Australia. And that's something that they may have never seen before. So you've got all of this support that you've given them in the previous activity to help them with this activity. A graphic organizer can also help. I think it might be really useful for some students to help them organize their ideas and also think about what possibilities there are. They could include special food that they might want to eat. Celebrations always have food, right? The activities that they might like to include. There might be music or special clothes or a special time of year. What are they celebrating? Who will they invite? As a group, they work together, give them time for this, and they can decide what to include in this new event that they're inventing on their own. Deliver. With their plan ready to go, the student can now bring it to life in any number of ways. And sometimes this is going to be making something. Sometimes it might be performing or presenting something. The deliver stage is their moment for this project that they're working on to become real. Don't just leave it on that piece of paper. Let them get hands-on. Let them actually create something, experience something. What does this look like in my lesson? Well, I thought what we do is we'd organize literally test out some of their ideas. Might not be in the same lesson, it could be in another lesson. But depending on what they planned, this might be, they might have planned a performance and you could organize for them to give that performance to another class or their classmates. Maybe it's going home and testing out a recipe, seeing what people think of it. Or perhaps it's playing a new game that they created in the playground, but they need to deliver something. They need to have an experience. They need to test this out. This is all part of this process, isn't it? Let them test it out. Let them get feedback from the participants who were there with them. And the last stage is share. I think now more than ever, learning to communicate, to explain your ideas, to share your ideas, this has become an essential skill that children, adults and us, we need now and in the future, but especially in the future, right? to close the lesson, there is always a moment, in my lessons at least, for the group to come together again and share what they've produced, share what they've learned, share what they've achieved that day. I think this is a really nice way to value what they've done, you know, and as well as providing teachers with a way to gauge the learning that took place that day. It becomes, I think, even more meaningful when they can also plan strategies or maybe even bigger campaigns, you know, that are going to help share their ideas, share what they've done to an even wider audience. Perhaps they could share it with families or the school community. If they have a digital portfolio, it would be perfect for them to be able to take what they've registered, what they've done, and put it on their digital portfolio as evidence of learning and their journey. So this for me is really important. It doesn't always have to be sharing publicly, and I know in a lot of schools we can't. Depending on the platform you use, you can have them sharing online in a safe space, which is closed just to specific people. But I think sharing, putting it out there, connecting with people who can give them valuable feedback on what they've done, or people who are going to benefit from what they've done, it is a game changer for children. So we're almost at the end now of this presentation, and I haven't been able to see people's questions here, but I really do hope that you have questions, because I'm going to be completely transparent with you here. This isn't something that I have any hard and fast answers to. I know that we're going to be facing new challenges, and I know that we are going to be having problems that we haven't even imagined yet we're going to be faced with in the coming months and years. And I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on this, but I will tell you that I'm extremely interested in being part of creating real solutions for the problems. And I know I can't do this alone. I don't think that I'm going to come in and solve everyone's problems, but I do want to connect, and I do want to have this conversation with more like-minded, dedicated teachers. So now I'm going to suggest that we have a bit of a reflection together. This was an example of how I teach the same language that you'd find in a typical language course book, places in the city, verbs for things that we like to do. There might be food vocabulary there, but can you see how I've presented it in a context that is actually going to be meaningful to the young learner? And I'm really focusing not just on the language, but on developing skills that can transfer, skills that they're going to need to thrive in this rapidly changing world that we live. So I'm going to now invite you to do the same. In the chat box, what other topics can you think of that typically appear in your scope and sequence that could be transformed using this framework? Let's see what you can come up with. What topics come to mind straight away, just without overthinking it too much? Pop it in there. Professions, Patricia, excellent. Community helpers, that is one that typically appears in the course book. Heidi, likes and dislikes is another classic one about likes and dislikes. We have that especially revolving around food. Let's start off with professions, and let's go back and think about the very first lesson stage. How might we be able to kick off a project, kick off a lesson that is going to be looking at professions in a very playful way? What do you think? Heidi has come up with an idea straight away by talking about what parents do. Now, I think, Heidi, what we could do is we could bring that into the relate stage. I think that would be a really good place to start looking a little bit under the microscope at this and making connections between the topic and the real life. Let's go back a bit and let's think about being playful. What kind of game might we encourage them to play? Remember, this is all about them working together. This is all about them developing a close relationship. It's trying to cooperate together. It's non-competitive, but we are playing here. We're being very, very playful with this idea. who can think of a game? Heidi's made a good point. She said that it depends a lot on the age that they are. Let's assume that these are primary age learners. Let's go with lower primary. They're lower primary, so they may be 6 to 8 years old. What kind of game could we play to get this started? So Kenya's brought in an idea here that I'm going to run with. Imagine that you have brought in props, realia, from a whole different bunch of professions, something that would represent professions. This is a really interesting one because remember this idea of professions that exist today. We know a lot of them are going to disappear in the future. So I feel like in this lesson we have to play around with this idea. What if you had realia, objects from different, look at me riffing. This is what I do in my collaborative lesson planning sessions with teachers as well. We throw ideas around. We play with these ideas. We come up with lots of different crazy things. So what if we had props from different professions and different students could come up and they could put their hands in the box. They could take out 2 things, completely different professions, and they had to invent a new profession. And they could explain that depending on their level of English. They could explain that with words, saying what this new profession is and what they do with these 2 objects, or they could just mime it. And they could mime it, pretend to be a day at the office with this new profession and how they're going to be using these tools. Let's say you had a blow dryer and a screwdriver. What kind of crazy profession do you think children could come up with those 2 objects? And that's how I think we could start exploring this topic. Let's keep going with professions. And I want to go back to this idea that Heidi brought us before. And Heidi made this link to their real lives. So what professions do their family have? But we could even go further. We could say, who in the community helps us every day? And you could really push them to think further than the typical professions that appear in the course book: police officer, doctor, teacher, etc., etc. We could get them to think about the people that they see every day when they go downstairs and leave their building, the person who opens and closes the door for them, the portero, right, the door person. You could think about the people who clean our streets for us. We could think about the people who work in the canteen at our school. We could think about the secretary or the receptionist who greets us every day with a big smile when we arrive at school. We could think about all the people who contribute to making our lives better. And I think that would be a wonderful way to try and relate this topic to the kids. There are other nice ideas here. Evie Selma has said, present them with places and ask children who works here. Lovely, lovely. Let's keep going. I want to hear some more ideas from you. So now we are going to design something. And in order to design something, we have to really help children connect with a problem that needs to be solved. So here at this stage, what do you think that we could do? How could we take this idea of professions and think about what kinds of problems children could solve and come up with a solution for? And I'm going to prompt you here just for the sake of time, but I really love this idea of children being able to create a job in the future, you know, and I think we're going to see more and more of that. This idea of us not needing to start working for a company as soon as we leave university and stay at that same company doing the same job, or maybe moving up the ladder in the same profession all the time. There's going to be more and more opportunities for us to invent our own jobs. And I love the idea of preparing children for this. So if in the future, 40 to 70% of jobs will be affected by artificial intelligence. If a huge proportion of the jobs that are around today aren't going to exist in the future, if the jobs in the future that do exist, we haven't even dreamed of them yet, how can we get kids designing something, thinking about this? What do you think?
Yeah, while our audience is thinking about, Marcella brought up two questions on the Q&A, so you can see the Q&A on the right-hand side on the bottom. So if you can just go through them, it would be a pleasure.
Let me take a look here. Kathy from It's Playtime English just had a wonderful idea. She said, kids could think about problems the world is facing now and what sort of professions would be needed to solve them. Done. Design. That is it. Go for it, kids. I absolutely love that idea. So thinking about problems, perhaps in the relate stage of our lesson, we could have them coming up with the problems, and then the design stage, they now think of who is going to be the person who's going to solve that problem. I'm trying to see this Q&A so that I can
on the right. Yes, on the bottom right-hand side, close to raise a hand, you can see there's a number 2 on Q&A. On the bottom bar, you can see there's chat. If you go to totally to the right-hand side.
I can see the box, and I can see two things for Q&A. What I might get you to do, Enrique, is at the end of this, if you could read me out the questions, I'd be happy to look at them. Thank you.
I'll do the following. I'll quickly copy them to the chat. That's from Marcella.
And thank you very much, Marcella, for sending in these questions so we can keep discussing, keep this conversation going. So the deliver stage of this lesson, what do you think we could do? They've just come up with these new professions that are going to help solve these problems in the future that they've talked about. How could they now deliver this? What would you get your students to do? Heidi just came up with a wonderful idea. Put themselves in the position of the person that they've just invented with their job and have them talk about their day, what time they get up, what they do. Fantastic. I absolutely love that. So that would be a wonderful way for them to deliver. And if that's what they were going to be doing, I would definitely include that in the stage before as well. I would have some kind of graphic organizer, perhaps again, for them to fill in, where they could organize these kinds of information, some prompt questions for them to do. Excellent. And then the final one would be to share. How could they share these ideas with a wider audience? And when I like to think about sharing this, I like to think about two things. Either who would it be interesting to share this with so that they could get informed feedback about their ideas or solutions that they've come up with? Who could give them really valuable feedback, and or who would benefit from the ideas that they came up with? Heidi's got another idea here on interviewing each other, asking simple questions. A jobs fair of the future would be another way for them. I think we're still on the deliver. A jobs fair of the future sounds like a wonderful idea. And maybe, so we can wrap this up and I have time to answer your questions, maybe what we could do here is keep a register of everything that they're doing in the deliver stage and collate all of that and share those things online. And I wonder if they could even share it with somebody who might be an expert in jobs of the future, or what we're going to need to be ready for in the future, and see how realistic their predictions were, and maybe learn a little bit more from an expert about what kind of jobs they'll need to do in the future. I've loved sharing these ideas with you all, but I've also loved hearing your questions. So this was Marcella. I'm not sure where Marcella is teaching, but she is an EFL or an ESL teacher, not a bilingual teacher. And she's talking about, I'm not sure if you can see her question in the chat here, but she's talking about the need to have students progress from non-speakers to proficient English speakers, helping them become, and she's used the Common European Framework of Reference here, helping them become B2, C1, C2 speakers eventually. How does she organize language acquisition in accordance to those standards? I think that what I'm talking about here breaks away radically from this lineal idea of how we learn language, as if when we go through typical scope and sequence, and we do past simple, then we do this other grammar point with this connected lexis, and we go through step by step. I feel that language learning, in my experience as a language learner, but also in 20 years in the classroom, I feel like we haven't managed, following a traditional method, we haven't managed to be terribly successful on a big scale at helping children move through to becoming fluent speakers. And I think we can certainly see that here in Brazil when we have a look at percentage-wise how many children have been learning English for years and years and years and grow up to be adults who are not proficient in the language, which is what has inspired me to look for alternative ways of teaching language. And I understand that in a lot of schools, you still do have to, you have a lot of these constraints imposed on you, which is why in these contexts, I think the flexibility of the FutureWe framework is so wonderful, because you can still do your unit on professions, and you can still have the lesson with the past simple, where they're learning this. These are languages, giving children input back at this relate stage, I think is really important still. But I'm not necessarily coming into my lessons with a prescribed list of what it is that I want my students to say. I'm using what is also known as emergent language. So I like to listen to what my students are saying, in addition perhaps to the lesson that I've given them in a previous moment on, let's go with this professions idea. They've had this lesson on professions, but maybe they're not interested in talking about becoming a doctor and a teacher and a bus driver, or whatever lexical list has come in my course book. My son wants to be a gamer. That's what he wants to spend the rest of his life doing, playing video games. There has to be a moment in our lessons that we allow children to use and learn, other way around, to learn language and use language to talk about things that are meaningful to them in the foreign language. And it comes in by dealing with emergent language that comes up in the lesson. And if you have a look, you know what I'm thinking might be even more useful here in Hiki is if I follow up this session. Everyone who is here has signed up for this session, so we can all be in contact. I think it would be really interesting for me to follow up with a complete lesson plan so that you can see the instructions that I would give to teachers on how to deal with emergent language that comes up in the relate stage. How, when I am monitoring them at the design stage, I'm getting in there and I'm helping them by providing them with language that they're going to need in order to then deliver what it is that they're planning at the design stage. When I say monitor and providing input, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I'm there to help them with new words or expressions that they need to use. And what I've noticed as well is when children are really genuinely engaged, when they are working on something that they're passionate about, they are really quick to ask, how do you say this? How do you say that? Like I said before as well, Marcella, they are using a lot of L1. But when we compare how much language they end up producing from a lesson like this with how much language they end up using when they're learning a list of words in a classroom, it's the same. It's the same. It's just that we've provided a context within which they can use it and learn it. So I hope that answers your question there. And I really think that perhaps seeing a full lesson plan is going to be even more clarifying. So I'm going to try and organize that for you all and have that emailed out. There's another one here. If they're planning a local celebration together, they might need to talk about food. They might need to talk about traditions using past tenses. They might need to talk about locations. And that's lots and lots of linguistic elements there. How do we help students learn all of those at the same time? How can they put their plan together without having that basis previously taught? And I was having a great discussion with Kenya today exactly about this topic, and how if you, for example, it actually relates very much to using authentic materials in your lesson. If you're bringing in an authentic text that you want to use with the students, you don't grade the language of the authentic text, you grade the task. So depending on how you set up this task, children will naturally work within their zone of proximal development, and you're there to scaffold that activity alongside them. You can, maybe if they're not ready to talk about locations, maybe if they're not ready to use the past tense forms, maybe they don't have to. Remember, you are allowing them the autonomy and the agency to come up with something that they want to produce. So leave it open. See what they can do. Sandy Moudon actually is another author that I absolutely really like, and a researcher. And she talks about how we often get students to practice the language with us in these very teacher-led moments. But the time comes when we have to do what she refers to as the handover. We have to hand over the language to the students and say, okay, in the previous lessons that we've been looking at, in the series of lessons leading up to this lesson, maybe we have talked about locations. Maybe we have talked about past forms. Maybe we've, maybe these kids are in grade 4 and they've seen food every year for the last 4 years. There has to be a moment when we say, okay, let's see what you can do with it. What can you do with this language? Have a go. See what they come up with, and I promise you, children will surprise you with just how much they can. But you have to give them an opportunity to do it. You have to give them time and space in lessons to be creative with language and use it in a way that means something to them. I really have loved being here tonight. Thank you again, Enrique, for this opportunity to talk about something that I'm obviously really passionate about. I tend to go on and on a bit about it, but it really is something that I've been working on for a very long time now. And I'll tell you this also, Marcelo, when I made the transition from teaching in a very traditional way, like I said at the beginning, I was a very traditional teacher. Making this transition wasn't just good for the students. It would be, I'd have to say, what saved me, what kept me in this profession, because we know being a teacher, especially in Brazil, is not easy, was this transition to this more holistic way of teaching English. It just feels good. It feels right. It was something that I instinctively wanted to do, and now being able to do it in practice feels amazing. And I hope in tonight's session I've encouraged you to take a look, have an experiment, have a play around with it. If it doesn't work out for you, absolutely fine. But I encourage you all, go to the FutureWe website, learn more. There's actually a little survey that you can do there that will assess how well developed you are in these different domains. It's good fun to do. They'll email you the results. Yeah, go check that out. And of course, I wish I had more time to answer these questions. I've just seen one final question there from Mauro. How can we make the teaching more powerful with one class a week? Encouraging them to practice on their own is a good way. Mauro, I think that's a great way. I think that if you, and let me tell you about at-home practice. If you set up a child if you give them, first of all, choice about what it is that they're going to learn about, and what it is that they're going to practice, and you've connected your lesson to something that they're passionate about, or something that's important to them, or solving a real problem that they have, you can be sure that kids are much more likely to get their homework done. So I think that's a really great way. Imagine if you have one class a week and all it is them looking at flashcards and memorizing the names of the colors and items of clothing. Give it a go. Kenya's
Claire,
here as well.
I'm sure you got, just sorry to interrupt you, Claire. We have a lot of questions. I think we have a chance to answer them. We're going to be in contact with all those participants. So I'm happy to say that if your question has not been answered right now, we're going to forward you an answer shortly. And what I will say also is that with all that knowledge that Claire shares with us tonight regarding the FutureWe framework, we do have materials that you can start using from tomorrow on, which were developed based on that, which are the just a second. Something. I know you're showing me something. I have a little boy, a big boy here. You want to say hello? You want to say hello?
Hey.
What do you want to say?
My party.
Your party, the party that we threw. Okay, that's how we learn English at home. Great, you threw a party. Say hello to everybody.
Hello.
Okay, now let me finish here. And you wait a minute. You're here. Bless you. Sorry, guys. That's Gabriel. Bless your boy. Go get a piece of paper. Go cooking your nose. Bye. Anyway, sorry, guys. So just to say, we do have Claire together with other great professionals, authors, have worked on amazing collection of books called Transfer Me Kids, which uses the FutureWe framework and has brought it down to earth, down to the classroom, how teachers can improve their teaching skills and how to bring that to life with students. I would just say it's amazing the work that Claire has been doing, leading a team, and Kenya is part of the team. We have other authors like James Taylor. We have others. We have Danielle Hersey. We have amazing team from different parts of the world. I would say we have from US, Australia, Brazil, and UK. So it has been a pleasure to be working with that team and to offer everyone who wants to embrace that new vision of how to teach to their children, to their students, to their schools, PLSs. It's a great opportunity for all of us to start looking into that. So we're going to forward you some more details about the program. But I couldn't be more happy to have you tonight with us here, just learning a little bit more about what Claire has been developing and doing and what she's passionate about.
Thanks very much, Enrique. I do, like I said before, I don't pretend to have all of the answers, but if you are interested in becoming part of the solution with me and the community, join us, join in this conversation. You know, don't let a robot steal your job. Thank you, everyone, especially Marcella. I think some of the doubts that were raised by Marcella, and I'm sure doubts that other teachers are having, are going to be really common as we look for new ways. As we know, change is not easy. Stepping outside of your comfort zone is, as the name suggests, uncomfortable, but it's worth it. It's worth it, and we can do this together. We can learn about this together. Visit the FutureWe website, learn about it more. Visit the Transform Me website, find out what the folks over there are already doing with high school. As Enrique said, didn't know we were going to be talking about it tonight, but that is the secret project that I've been working on for a very long time. It's coming, this Transform Me Kids. Yeah, thanks so much everyone for being here and being part of my my webinar this evening. Thanks for your ideas. Let's stay in contact.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It will be a pleasure to see you in other events. Thank you, Claire, from the bottom of my heart for all the hard work you've put behind this and believe in our dreams and believe in our vision of the world. Thank you very much.